Hey, so I am traveling from North Carolina to New Hampshire to visit some family, and I'm stuck somewhere around New York in some terrible traffic. So to fight off this boredom, I thought I would do a little bit of poetry analysis or commentary, rather. The poem I wanted to start with, I'll do a number here. The poem I want to start with is a really well-known one, The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. Probably most people have heard it, but if you haven't, it goes like this. Two roads diverge in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both, and be one traveler. Long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other, as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy, and wanted wear. Though as for that, the passing there had worn them really about the same, and both that morning equally lay, on leaves no step had trodden back. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh. Somewhere ages and ages hence, two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. So that is The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. And so normally I don't do this and I won't do it again, but I Googled around and YouTube to see what the meaning of this, or what other people thought the meaning of this poem was, and that's kind of why I wanted to mention it, just to show, I guess, how I would approach interpreting or analyzing a poem. So the way I like to think about these things would be in a space of the unknown. So whenever we're dealing in the unknown, it's futile to talk like you know the correct answer to something. The best you can do is take guesses and point to reasons why you think that's the best theory of what the author meant by the poem. And not all poems are about trying to figure out what the author is saying exactly, but this one does seem to be. So I noticed two videos that two other YouTube videos that I wanted to point out. One was done by a kind of female. I'll put links to them here, and I thought she did a great analysis. And another was done by a guy who I wouldn't be surprised if he was some sort of poetry educator or literary type person. But I wanted to draw a distinction between the way he analyzed the poem and by the way she analyzed the poem. And I want to try to do my best to follow how she does it much more closely. The way he speaks about this poem, at least, was very didactically. It was he seemed to have the correct answer, and that's the type of thinking that will almost always lead you down the incorrect path and make you certain of something that's just not correct, especially when it comes to the realm of the unknown and something like figuring out the meaning that the author had behind a poem. Any theory you have, when you apply it to the poem, you can make it fit pretty well. So approaching it like this is almost always terrible, and this is one of the reasons I don't like to see other people's analysis on a poem, because even if what they think it meant seems to fit pretty well, it still, I think, is very probably not originally what the author had intended. And the way this girl spoke about the poem was she did present what she thought was the most likely manner, or most likely theory, basically, of the meaning behind the poem, what Robert Frost was going for when he wrote the poem. and I think she was actually probably right. And then she also kind of explained a few other ideas, and she also explained kind of the well-known idea that that we should all take the road less taken, which is probably kind of some of the mainstream type thinking that is behind this poem, which she's entirely right in saying that's probably not how you should interpret the poem. And then she says some other theories as well and points out her. So to give you an idea of what here, well, I'll just tell you how I would interpret this poem. My main point here is to point out the way in which to approach something like this, rather than tell you what I think about it. But I'll go ahead and do that anyway. So if you look at the poem, it doesn't seem to me like Robert Frost has much of an intention at all as far as a road being less traveled or more traveled. I don't think this is really a theme to the poem. I think that what he's going for is a feeling of how important decisions are and how they will entirely shape and change your life, and you have to make them regardless of without having any information. So just the power a decision has, I think, is much more the theme of the poem. The two other analysis that I looked at, the one guy basically suggested, I'll do it succinctly, he basically suggested that Robert Frost somehow knew that everyone wanted to take the road less traveled, and that this was almost a jab at people for wanting that, and that he's being kind of semi-ironic at the end there, and so there's ways that you could interpret it that might make you think that, but I think on balance the girl in the video that I showed previously has the right answer, and that's also she has a similar interpretation to what I would think the author meant by this poem, and so I can back it up a little bit. So if you look at the poem, if you look at the first stanza or the first few lines here, two roads diverge in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler, long I stood and looked down one as far as I could. I didn't like that as far as I could when I first read this poem, because it seemed like it was just hanging there. But if you think about it in the context of a decision, it's actually quite nice because, or I'm sorry, as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. I didn't like the to where it bent in the undergrowth sentence because it just seemed to hang there. But if you think about it like a decision, you can kind of see how two paths will lead when you're making a choice, but only to a certain extent, and then it kind of fades out. So I like that kind of metaphor of to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim because it was wanted, because it was grassy and wanted where. And this is where I think the guy who did the interpretation he's overlooking this sentence a little bit, because it's not that his thinking would be that the two roads are exactly the same, and he's now just being the author is now just being ironic or facetious in some way when he's saying, I took the road less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. But this road did actually seem, it was grassy and wanted wear. So that indicates that it actually was, it was slightly less traveled by. And then the next sentence, he offsets that a bit by saying, though as for that, the passing there had worn them really about the same. So the idea here is he seems to be creating two paths that are pretty equal, but they're not exactly equal. I mean, they just have, different traits, basically. One was probably grassier and wanted where it was slightly less traveled. But to me, it's basically no big deal. Both that morning equally lay, on leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I think that is quite, I think yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. So that kind of shows the idea of when you make a decision, it really does, it kind of splits off how your life is going to go, and one decision will lead to, you know, giving you the option of another decision, as opposed to, you know, the initial fork that you would go. So it really to me that emphasizes the power of how a decision will entirely shape your life. And then the last little block of lines here, whatever you call that, I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverge in a wood. So let me stop right there. I think a lot of people really emphasize the sigh here, like I shall be telling this with a sigh, that he's somehow either a sigh of regret or remorse, or he's about to perjure himself when he says this, or something like that. To me, you can also interpret that as just I shall be telling this somewhere with a sigh, an indication that he's older and you know, reminiscing on the past. It doesn't necessarily have to mean that he's ashamed or anything. Two roads diverge in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. So obviously this is the most everyone is probably familiar with that. I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. So initially, if you just read this, it obviously seems like a lot of the poem is about the amount of people traveling the road. But it seems to me that a better explanation is he's just identifying the road he took. He could have said, I took the grassier path, and that has made all the difference. And I think he really could have just as easily said that, but it's just an identification. So I think that it has made a lot of people interpret this in ways that maybe the author did not originally intend. So yeah, I think a much better explanation of this poem is the simpler explanation, that it's just about how important a decision can be in your life. And I know that's a bit drab and arid. I know some people who spend their whole lives studying poetry probably don't want to hear that. They want to think that the author is somehow just some brilliant guy. But I think the simplest explanation is more apt to be true. Anyways, that'll be my first poem. What I mostly like to do on the poetry front, well, if it's even considered that, is I love these little lyrics. Something like, there once was a man from Bonaire doing his wife on the stair. When the banister broke, he doubled his stroke and finished her off in midair. There you go.